So we are looking at discussing today Learning Outcome 3. And Learning Outcome 3 it falls in line in terms of what we've been discussing, but just very briefly, if we do a quick bit of recap in terms of what we've discussed. So when we look at first part, we discussed what is globalization and, how it's all started, what are the various phases of it, and, our business affected by it, and what are the positive and negative effects of it. One of the positive effects that we get to see of globalization is, alleviation of poverty. So with economic growth and, things happening which are positively moving things into a direction wherein it helps economic prosperity come across various nations, what we do get to see is that one of the things, if we look at the very positive effects of globalization, is alleviation of poverty. This is a hot topic, and obviously the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, a lot of other organizations which basically help World Trade Organization, all the organizations, United Nations, which basically look at promoting global trade. One of the key agendas within this global trade is primarily to look at bringing people out of poverty, whether it's in Africa, the Indian subcontinent, you look at Far East, whichever place. The idea is that the part and parcel of the, part and parcel of this globalization process should be to look at bringing people out of poverty. So in China, for example, 180 million people have been brought out of poverty by the communist government. In India, if you look at about 18 million people, 19 million people have come out of poverty in the last, 70, 75 years after they gained independence. You look at Africa, some of the developing nations or underdeveloped countries, there is a lot of work which charities do and governments do, and social companies which are set up with as a social enterprise do within Africa to basically look at removing some of these let's say barriers to people getting access to good facilities, clean basic things like clean drinking water, electricity, which are considered luxuries or just normal things in life. When we look at developed countries like us in the UK and Europe and US and other places, but some of these are, what are called things which have not reached certain places. And one of the things which globalization is helping to do is essentially help, alleviate poverty, which is where it is driving development. It is, driving what is called, technology, and some of the other enablements are driving what is called development across nations in terms of infrastructure, in terms of basic infrastructure which is required, and that is helping people get or have better lives. That was the first part. So we looked at the context of globalization. The second learning outcome was more focused on what are the drivers of globalization. So what does the word global mean? What is global economy? What is global environment, economic environment or business environment? And then what are the key issues which drive globalization? So we looked at things like, technology, containerization, lowering of trade barriers or tariffs, lots of agreements, companies becoming multinational, and all those things have then started to drive what are called issues, or factors which are basically driving globalization. We also looked at a video which I'd asked you to watch. I'm not too sure whether you watched that video, but in terms that 11-minute video helps beautifully summarize what is globalization, what drives globalization, how companies look at transforming borders and obviously start selling products, goods and services across different geographies. And then what are the push and pull drivers, or what are the demand and supply drivers which basically, propel globalization into one direction, which is taking it forward. And then we looked at one or two frameworks like PESTEL in general, which allows companies to understand what factors could be affecting them and their business when they look at taking the decision of going international, or of obviously looking at opening operations in other countries. And they would look at things like legislation, laws, labor laws. They will look at foreign direct investments. They will look at things which are going to be conducive for them to be able to start business, things like availability of partners, suppliers, foreign direct investment in terms of money, restrictions from the government, from the regional government or the national government in terms of policies. They would all be looking at all that in terms of factors before they look at evaluating how they would be affected by the drive to internationalize the business or increase the business. Now, in the third learning outcome, we are going to be focused on why. So we have come to a stage where we want to ask the question why. Why do we want to operate in a global market? Why do we want a business might ask that question at some stage of after a startup, for example, a new business is started, and at some stage they would decide that maybe 2, 3, 4, 10 years down the line, depending on the size scale of the operation, somebody in the management would come up with the question of why do we need to expand to a global market? Why can't we continue just operating in one country, one nation, or one location? Why do we need to expand? So this learning outcome 3 is focused on understanding how and why of the business needs to operate in a global market. And there are obviously 3 assessment criteria here. One of them looks at discussing why a business would want to enter the global market. So here we are looking at reasons of why do you think the business would essentially want to look at getting into a different market altogether. The other bits that you are looking at in this learning outcome is to understand in terms of ways through which the business can look at different strategies to enter that market. So here we're going to be talking about things like, you've generally heard things like franchising, joint venture. When we say the business wants to diversify, we also look at partnerships which businesses do. Sometimes they look at expanding operations by looking at opening subsidiaries, and all these are ways through which a business would look at starting operations in a different geography or a country. And they would be a part and parcel of a business looking at becoming global. So at some stage, what you will generally see is that when the management or when the leadership in the top leadership in the company decides that they want to really expand, they are going to do a bit of market research to see which markets they can expand to, which markets have customers or demand for their products, and which markets would be conducive for them from a point of view of policies and strategies and government regulation, which will allow them to expand. And then we will look at various avenues through which the company can actually enter that market, whether it's going to be a joint venture, whether it's going to be a franchise operation, whether it's going to be, say, for example, direct investment the company would do and start, creating infrastructure in that country, set up a factory. And in some cases, they might also look at, takeover, which is mergers and acquisition, as we call it. And in those cases, what you're generally going to see is that the company would take the route, okay, there's no point in reinventing the wheel in order to shorten the time in the market. The company might decide, okay, the best way for us to enter the market is to look at acquiring a running operation, and that running operation would give them a jump start. And in that case, they would look at, buying out that company, and that would be a merger or, an acquisition, depending on how they follow it through. So those are the bits that we're going to be looking at today in Learning Outcome 3. So the 3 assessment criteria talk about, discuss why a business wants to enter global market. So we need to understand reasons and, logic behind why you should get to expand, or why is there a need for expansion. Second is comparing the ways in which, and these are, when I say compare ways, we are looking at ways through which the company can get into, or an organization can open business in international market. And last but not the least, we are going to look at recommending ways of how a business could enter the market. So here, when we look at entry into the business in the market, what we are looking at is a specific organization to discuss with an example, rather than talk about it generically. So we would need to look at going through some of the methods through which companies can actually open operations in other countries, or go international, or open operations in other countries and nations. But we will also then look at taking a particular company and then look at suggesting a strategy, which is where recommendations come in. So we will recommend a particular strategy of how this particular brand could actually go into a market, and what could be the strategy or the ways through which they'll be able to expand into that location. So a fair bit of indicative content that we'll be looking at covering, and that would help us address some of the assessment criteria and this particular learning outcome. Okay. Is that okay? Clear enough as an introduction? And then what we'll do is we'll discuss some of this, through the route of looking at a presentation. Now, okay. Looking at some key terminology first, in terms of, the keywords which are coming across essentially when you look at the learning outcome itself. So it says understand how and why a business would want to operate at a global market. Now, by now we very clearly know what is a global market. So, for example, if we talk about a global market, what we are looking at is a market from a perspective of global market. What we are going to be looking at is talking about a system through which the company or the organization or a business can actually operate in different countries, and that would be treated as what is called a global market. A simple example of global market would be if you look at, say, for example, the English Premier League. The football, English Premier League. English Premier League is basically local to UK or, Britain. And obviously that is why it is called the English Premier League. We have Scottish Premier League as well. And then there are lots of clubs which actually play, football in this Premier League. Now, each country has different Premier Leagues. So when you go to Italy or Spain, La Liga, you go to, Germany, Bundesliga, you go to, France. Lots of different countries have different, ways through which they have the same product. But now, if the clubs are to be valued, and we look at market valuation, or if we look at clubs which primarily, sometimes they do what are called invitational matches. They do play fundraising matches. They have competitions, and the teams travel to different locations and do participate in tournaments or matches. What we are going to see is that these clubs have what is called a global market, simply because they have audience within the UK, if I talk about English Premier League, but they also have audience, specifically clubs like Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea. They have a global following. Now, they normally sell products, the merchandise which these clubs have, they normally sell this merchandise, in very many different countries. So merchandise like T-shirts, it could be mementos, trophies, medals, lots of different types of merchandise. And for them to be able to attract and get or garner more business, they need to be addressing what is called a global audience. Now, football, if you look at, it's the most popular sport in the world. Maybe between 2 and 3 billion people follow football. And obviously in most continents, if you look at South America, you look at, Europe, you look at Far East, Middle East now, there is a big fan following and, demand for football. So here, when a company starts to operate and sell its goods and services in different markets, they have a demand for these products and services in different markets. You would generally say that the business would need to look at a global strategy to address its audience and its consumers worldwide. And they would start then looking at it from a point of view of not just UK, but they will look at the global, market, or look at the world as a global village. And in those cases, we would consider and say that we are talking about from a point of view of economics, which is commercials, companies looking at making money, making more profits, selling more merchandise, getting more consumers, more followers, and more fun following. And that is where they would start to look at making a decision that we need to operate. Our appeal is bigger than the appeal in the UK market. We need to start expanding into other markets. And that is where, when they start addressing that expansion, and when they feel that they have a need, their product, their services, there's a demand for their products and services, and they start to meet that demand by expanding into other markets, they will be operating in what is called a global market. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now, second question that comes to my mind is, when I look at the learning outcome, understand how and why a business wants to operate in global market, would be that why would a business want to go to, expand to global market? A simple reason is, what I think of from a personal perspective is that when we look at expansion, when we look at growth, you are looking at increasing something. That is why you are looking at expanding. You are looking at, and even if we look at a simple example of, say, a career, in your career, obviously we want more salaries, we want better positions, we want better perks, we want better emoluments and, better incentives. But the desire to drive, the drive to grow is what drives you as an individual to look at, striving or working hard to get more salary or a better job. Similarly, when we look at a business, businesses are set up as organizations to be able to make profits for themselves, for their stakeholders, for the management, and, for shareholders. So if a business feels the need that they have demand for their products and services, and their expansion into other geographies or other places would help in, say, for example, increasing profit, decreasing costs, looking at hiring maybe talented employees, looking at getting access to more consumers, or in some cases, it just is a logical argument that we want to grow the business and increase the turnover and increase and become a big organization, say from a small business to a small medium business to a large business to a large corporation, then there is a need for driving growth. And that growth sometimes can come from expansion of business going across different markets. Is that okay? So
okay.
You look at Marks and Spencer, we look at some of the British companies, you look at some of the European brands, you look at some of the American brands, they started off as businesses within their home country. So for example, if I look at Subway, look at McDonald's, they started off, within the US, but slowly and gradually as the market started to become saturated, that means they had expanded to, say, good number of cities, like 200 cities. They had restaurants of 3,000-4,000, and they were able to easily meet the requirements of their customers. And the business wasn't growing. At some stage, somebody in the management would start thinking that how do we now look at growing the business beyond, say, if they've reached a turnover of $1 billion, how do we go from $1 billion to $2 billion? When they think of that, then they look at starting to do research, they start to look at other markets. And when they start to look at other markets, they would look at creating a plan or a strategy wherein they will start to look at expanding into a particular market which is closer to them. So American brands first expanded to Mexico, Canada, Americas, then they looked at overseas across the Atlantic, and then slowly and gradually Coca-Cola, Pepsi, good examples, they have started and they have now become international or global businesses in a span of, maybe 100 years of their operations. And they are now present in 180, 190 countries and sell products globally. And there is this intention of growing the business, increasing the brand, increasing the consumer base, increasing profit. And in some cases, they've acquired brands, they've merged with certain subsidiaries, and they have increased the overall, revenue or the turnover of the business. And that is what drives business to, grow globally. Now, the last question that I look at is how and why. So why a business would like to operate in a global market? So in some cases, why would a business like to operate in a global market? This would be because they want to drive growth. But now, what are the instruments through which they take this step? What are the methods or techniques through which they can look at expanding into a global market? So some of the reasons which come across that we have discussed in the previous slide, they want to go to new markets, new customers. They want to look at diversification. Okay, we are now pretty much, have monopoly in a particular category. So if I look at, for example, Coke and Pepsi. Coke and Pepsi are the two beverage companies which have pretty much monopoly over, every sort of beverage that we have. Whether you have Britvic, whether you have Iron Brew, whether you have Cola, whether you have Fanta, Sprite, Tango. All these brands are essentially either owned by Pepsi or by Coke. So what they've done is they started off with their core products, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, but over the years, they've created a lot of different product extensions, things like Pepsi Max, Coca-Cola Zero, or, Coke without caffeine, things like that. Now, the reason why they've done it is because consumers' demands are also changing, preferences are changing, and in order to address those, they are also looking at diversification. So this is something that we'll discuss in detail. But these are some of the reasons just to put them in the back of your mind in terms of why does a business feel the need that they need to operate globally or expand globally. So newer markets, more consumers, diversification. Sometimes it is access to the talent. Why do you think companies like Microsoft, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple look at taking on staff from overseas countries? Do you think there is there is no good availability of trained and expert staff within US? Probably not. But what they want to look at is they want to look at acquiring global talent. So some of the companies look at recruiting from abroad, and in those cases they would basically want to get the best of the best to come in and work in the company, which will help drive expansion or help drive growth in the company. Sometimes company would look at expanding because they want competitive advantage. And we look at an example of how competitive advantage comes across, because if Primark, H&M, Zara, and some of the other brands, also all work within the same sector, or like clothing, if I consider, and they are having a fierce competition because simply they are addressing the same 65 million customers or 66 million customers in the UK. Now, why would you go to Marks and Spencer or Zara or H&M or Primark? Is that you might be persuaded by looking at pricing of the product, the way they have these designs and colors or patterns on clothes, and you feel them and you find them more appealing. You might want to buy some of these brands. Now, in order to be competitive, sometimes companies would look at driving competition by driving price down. They might become more price competitive. That means you look at Primark, you can buy a good t-shirt from Primark at about 7 or 8 pounds. You might buy the same product from Marks and Spencer about 10 to 12 pounds. You might buy that from H&M for 15 pounds. And you might buy that same product from Zara, slightly considered upmarket, at about 20, 25 pounds. Now, that in order to drive price points, they know that which target consumers they address and what is the price point which consumers like. If a company wants to drive competitive advantages, they would look at outsourcing, look at manufacturing in a place wherein it was going to be cheaper for them to look at costs, and they essentially would like to look at competitive advantage. Then you have opportunities for investment. You have decreasing costs, which is through outsourcing. You have diversifying risks. So sometimes companies have manufacturing facilities in different locations, because if there's a fire in one factory, or if there is an unrest of labor or unions in one particular location or country, then they don't want their supply chains to be disrupted. And in those cases, companies would look at diversification risks. So they will have manufacturing facilities in different locations. You look at Apple. If the sale of Apple products stops, the company would be taking lots of losses, operating losses, because the size and scale of the operation is huge. And if they don't continue to sell some of their products on a daily basis, and if supply chains are disrupted, this would mean a major loss of business for Apple, but it would also mean a major advantage for some of its competitors like Samsung and Oppo and other brands which are selling the similar products. So in this case, in order to diversify risk, they have opened up factories in China, they have factories in Taiwan, they have factories in India. And this means that if one particular factory or one particular side of operations do not work, or have issues in terms of political unrest or economic unrest or supply chain disruption, that would still mean the other facilities would be able to pick up that slack and then essentially stabilize the supply chain for the sale of their products. So in some cases, companies would like to operate in global markets because they're looking at diversifying risk. And this is a nutshell of what we are going to cover today in this particular learning outcome that we are looking at. Now, let's look at a short video, and this would help put these three questions in a bit of a perspective, that why do companies or countries or they want to do international trade. So let's listen into this particular video, which is going to be sorry, just one second, share, which is going to be hopefully useful to understand what I have been talking.
Countries engaged in international trade based on the logical saying of no man is an island. Countries trade to benefit from interacting with other countries. Countries in isolation have to contend with being self-sufficient and having a lesser variety of goods. With international exchanges of goods and services, countries get to enjoy a wider variety of goods that may offer better quality. Besides that, the key reason for trade is that by trading goods, countries can afford to specialize in producing only some items that they're relatively better at producing. Trade means each country does not need to produce everything, but just focus its scarce resources on what it produces more efficiently, or what it has a comparative advantage in. The country hence focuses all its resources in what it's best at producing, mass producing for the whole world, and exchanging these for what it's not so great at producing. On a global scale, this means that the world becomes a global production hub, with each country specializing in producing what it's best at. The world's scarce resources are hence put to their best use for all our wants, allowing more to be produced and hence consumed globally. This is the main advantage of trade that is spelled out in the law of comparative advantage. Plus, with mass production, there are cost savings as firms benefit from bulk purchases and specialized manpower, or known as economies of scale. So international trade really is a big step forward for the world in increasing its efficiency. That's why we have countries signing trade deals to foster more cross-border transactions that tap on each other's resources.
So this gives you an idea in terms of why countries, look at international trade, and it brings in a bigger perspective than what we were discussing in terms of looking at countries or in this case companies, and then we looked at a bit of a perspective on why do countries trade, but the reasons why they are looking at are some of them which can be filtered down to why companies want to look at doing global trade. And that is because they want to expand. Sometimes there's scarcity of resources. Sometimes they want access to resources. Sometimes they feel the access to newer markets would give them access to new consumers, which would help them expand and obviously become more profitable. Their operations could become big. There could be n number of reasons, but we would categorize them in about 9 or 10 different types that I've listed down here. And that is where and how the companies look at entering the global market or becoming or going global in terms of their operations. Now, with this bit of understanding, let's look at going into some of the assessment criteria and discuss this in a bit more detail. The first part talks about discuss why a business would want to enter global market. So some of the points which I have mentioned are now points that we are going to discuss specifically. So when we look at global market, one of the connotations of global market would mean that the company is looking at expansion. So if they say they want to look at going, like if I say Marks and Spencer decides that they want to enter Malta or they want to enter into a market like Turkey, one of the things which they would want, why this want comes up or this need comes up is because they want to expand. And that is nothing but market expansion. That means they are going from one type of market to another type of market. And this way, what the company is looking at doing is primarily, let's say, broadening its operations or increasing its footprint of operations across different places. One such reason of market expansion could be done. What is the route through which they can do this? Now, one such route could be diversification. Diversification, when we talk about, in terms of business diversification, diversification would essentially mean that the business is looking at, going into something different than what it is generally doing in terms of its operations. So if I look at Marks and Spencer, just as an example, they have food division, they have clothing, they have grocery. They also started Marks and Spencer Home. And their main business over the years when Marks and Spencer essentially started was in clothing. Now, over the decades and years that the business has operated, I think more than 80, 90 years now, they have now diversified into, different types of business or sectors. So they are into clothing, they're into grocery, they're into furniture, which is Marks and Spencer Home. They are into electronics. They have also gone into bank, Marks and Spencer Bank. They've also become a business which primarily, has holidays, Marks and Spencer Holidays. But some of these business might be small portions of what they contribute to the turnover. But what has happened is over the years, in order to address the British customers, they have seen that the customer population has not drastically increased. So if I go back, say, for example, just let me do a quick Google. When was Marks and Spencer formed or founded? Okay. If we look at Marks and Spencer, it was founded in 1884 in Leeds. And when we look at when the company was started, this company was basically a retailer and it used to buy goods and sell it from its outlet. But over the years, what it has done is that it has expanded into lots of different types of operations. There is a company that, the main company has remained the same, but under the company, a lot of umbrella companies have got created. And the reason why they have done this over the years is that the population in Britain has not increased drastically. So it's gone from 50 million to 60 million or 68 million currently, but it has not increased. If you look at the 100 years or 125 years, 150 years, I think close to 150 years that the business spans, the shift in population has not been that much. It is obviously a couple of billions, but in terms of the number of consumers which it addresses that can buy its product may have not grown exponentially. So in this case, what they've done is they started off with the clothing business, then expanded into retailing by opening outlets. When they had the big outlets, they started to retail grocery. They started opening restaurants. They started looking at a bank. They also started looking at holidays. And the reason why they looked at is that if they were looking at just being, and if you look at how and when Marks and Spencer started operating globally, this side of the expansion primarily has only happened in the last 20-25 years. They've retained more or less a UK brand or a British brand, but late 1990s, they started to expand internationally because what we did see at that point in time, in that era, LPG started to happen. Liberalization, privatization, and globalization was a big, push in many countries to, globally, many countries and nations to basically grow, their businesses beyond or grow their trade beyond their borders. So at that point in time, they also started to expand internationally. But if you see Marks and Spencer, they have not been ballistic. They have not gone and expanded to 100 countries. They are only present in terms of operation in 14 or 15 countries. But one of the things which they have used to expand the business is diversification. That means they've started to offer multiple products in multiple markets, and they have started to get diversification. That means they've started to get revenue streams from different types of businesses that they have introduced for gaining customers or acquiring customers. Now, so in short, what I'm trying to say is in the UK, the customer base has not grown that much. So in order to address that demand of the customer, because if you say, look at, if you get a salary of £2,000, from that £2,000, £400 goes to mortgage, £200 goes to fuel, 300 goes to the bills. You have then maybe £300-400, which you spend on food and other bits and, maybe takeaways and dinners and things like that. And then you have £100 on something and then some on clothing. Now, if you look at this pie chart, what Marks and Spencer intended to do in terms of expansion was that if my customers are finite, how do I get a larger share of the pie in terms of revenue for the company? So they expanded into retailing, they expanded into grocery, they expanded into clothing, they expanded into banking, they expanded into holidays, and they expanded into home. So in such cases, what this did by diversifying or by basically starting to get into newer markets and newer products and services, it allowed them to get a larger share of the pie from individual customers, because the customer base was not growing exponentially. They had to look at ingenious ways to look at expanding the business wherein they could get more money from the same customer, but maybe for different services. So you might buy some clothes this month. You also might go and dine in Marks and Spencer. You might buy a product for your home, furniture. You might also look at booking a holiday. You might look at M&S insurance, which they've got into. So car insurance, holiday insurance, health insurance. And these are industries or sectors that they've got into. And this has allowed the business to diversify. But their core business is clothing, food, furniture, and, financial services that they do, which are now contributing towards the expansion of the brand globally. So when we look at points like these in terms of why businesses want to enter global market, you might want to look at taking up an example of a company that you know, and you can do a bit of researching, and then look at points like market expansion, increased revenue, and profit potential. So from certain businesses like insurance businesses, banking, the company can get more profits or get more revenues because, let's face it, you get insurance to get peace of mind. When you're traveling abroad, you take a holiday insurance, you take a life insurance out. But how many people do end up having a claim on that? So these businesses are profitable because there's a certain percentage that the company needs to aside to be able to settle claims, but most of it tends to be, coming into the bottom line or profitability of the company. Not literally, but just looking at why some of these businesses are much more lucrative in terms of driving, revenue and profitability for the companies. Other points could include cost advantages. Sometimes outsourcing of operations or manufacturing into other locations could be done, and that would be, cost advantage. You look at obviously accessing resources, which could be human resources, financial, administrative, infrastructure, manufacturing resources, and that could be, acquisition or basically getting access to them by expanding operations to other markets. And obviously, when companies expand to other geographies and newer countries or places, what you will generally get to see is that they will also be looking at innovation and learning, because you'll be learning about different cultures, society, different rules, regulations, and that in general would essentially allow the company to amass what is called intellectual capital, and that would allow it to start looking at bringing innovation through research and development in its operations. And Marks and Spencer or any other company that we look at, they'll all be investing in what is called R&D in order to look at coming out with new products, new offerings, which meet the demands and needs of the customers, and that is where they'll be looking at the process of expansion. Some of the other points which would also include is risk diversification. For example, if in certain countries there is recession, or if the growth is slowing down, demand is slowing down, then in those cases, companies also look at expanding internationally, because countries like in the Far East, Indian subcontinent, you look at India is the fastest growing economy now for the second year in a row. It's overtaken China. So China has been driving economic growth at the rate of between 6 to 8 or 9%, almost for the last decade. But now India is rivaling China. So India, China, Indonesia, you look at some of the countries in Northwest Africa, like Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, they are driving the growth. If you look at South America, you're looking at Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Chile. And if you look at the Americas, Mexico in particular, these are countries which are driving economic growth, wherein the growth is happening in double digits. That means there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% growth happening in those economies. So in these countries, there is fair bit of advantage for companies to expand, because they are looking at risk diversification. So UK, if you look at this year, the growth, I think the GDP growth is what, 2.2% or maybe 0.3%. Look at Germany, 1.2%. Some of the other economies in Europe, the growth is very low. US 3%, 3.5%. But if you look at emerging markets, or BRICS as we call it, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, BRICS as we call it, and now there are talks of Saudi Arabia, some of the other Middle Eastern economies which are also joining the BRICS as a consortium. That is a group, and that is a group of countries which are driving economic growth globally. So if we look at BRICS as just a group of countries, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they contribute 17 to 18% of the world's GDP. So in this case, if your business is a global business, or if you're a big organization and you're not present in these countries, then obviously, you're missing out on increasing or, transacting more business. And risk diversification tends to be a strategy wherein you want to avert, let's say, downfall in terms of fall in your revenue, turnover, or profits. And that's why sometimes companies also look at expanding, globally. Then obviously in some places you could have regulatory and policy changes. There could be strategic advantages. So there are examples that I could mention in this case. For example, when you look at why most companies wanted to set up manufacturing facility in China, there were regulatory and policy advantages. That means in China, there was free flow of foreign direct investments. Companies could set up subsidiaries and have the majority of stake in those subsidiaries. Infrastructure was very good. The government policy was quite conducive, because government provided benefits to companies coming to China to be able to, set up factories or manufacturing, because it saw, advantage in the long run is that it will create job opportunities, employment opportunities, and in general, that will uplift the market and their country's economy. So they provided benefits in terms of lower taxation. In some places, for example, for the company to invest, maybe giving the land for free, helping from the government side in terms of creating policies which would allow them to get loans to be able to set up said facilities, for a longer duration at a cheaper rate, and then allowing their own, let's say, people in terms of making sure immigration policies were conducive so that expats could work in those countries for a certain amount of time, visa regulations being streamlined. So this will all come under what are called regulatory and policy advantages. And that helped China become the manufacturing market of the world. And these features then also help China to grow economically, to bring people out of poverty. So 180 million people in the last 2 decades have been brought out of poverty. That means people have a house, they have a shelter over their head, they are employed, they have stable income, they've started, issuing pensions to people who are, in their retirement age or senior citizens. And all that has brought economic prosperity. But it also helps the companies because government policy and legislation and regulation also is conducive for them to be able to start business, to take advantage of some of these, soaps and benefits which, governments give. So if I just summarize the first part, that when we look at why does a business or why would a business want to enter global market, these could be some of the potential advantages and reasons why they would want to expand. And they have to be addressed by taking an example of a particular business, and that would help, understand this particular assessment criteria well. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's go to the second one, which talks about compare ways in which business can enter global markets. So here we are going to be talking about what are the various strategies or routes the company can actually take. Let me not use the word route, but say modes of entry, which the company can take to expand into a particular country. Now, in order to do this, what I've done is I have created a table, and this table helps summarize the various routes which a company would look at when they want to get into expanding operations or entering a newer market. So one of the things that you would look at is the company produces surplus goods. That means it has surplus to what it can meet its demand in the domestic market in the country in which they originally or was founded or work. And what they need now have is surplus goods in terms of what they produce, and they have to export or they have to sell it elsewhere. And that would lead to a process called exports. That means if iron and steel industry, or for example, if we look at any sort of manufacturing and it produces agriculture, for example, if you look at, and in the UK, for example, British farmers produce excess milk, which is more than what the local population can consume. So in this case, the export of milk is allowed to other nations within European geography, wherein milk may be required in quantities. And that allows British farmers to export milk because they are producing much, much more than what is required to be consumed by the local population. So one of the things that you look at why a business would want to enter a global market is, if I look at agriculture, if there is a surplus, they want to export rather than have that rot or be wasted. Second part could be licensing. Now, if you look at any sort of software business, for example, or any sort of business wherein they feel that they have something which is like unique, which could be an intellectual property, but in order to expand their operations and get more revenue, the business would like to enter into what is called a licensing agreement. That means they would basically look at entering into an agreement with the country or a foreign entity, and that would allow them to sell the services under a particular license, and that would be the route of licensing. So when you look at most software companies, you buy MS Office, you as a student or as a professional use the Microsoft Office, you pay a £59 subscription, $59.99 in the UK if you're a student, and that is a yearly subscription. So what is happening in that case is it's a bit of licensing. So in order for Microsoft to reach consumers in other locations, what they've done over the years is everything used to ship on a CD, but now with Office 365 and the Office 365 suite, they have created all this particular software on the cloud. And if anybody wants to use this software anywhere in the world, all they have to do is they can trial it for 30 days or 60 days in certain places. But beyond that, they can buy this software and by paying a subscription service. And that is nothing but an example of licensing. That is happening at the individual level, at the customer level, at the business level, at enterprise level and at government level or public and private sector level, because everybody needs, say for example, to use some of the softwares like Microsoft Office. Franchising is another opportunity. Franchising means you're allowing a business or an entity to operate under your name, but in return or in exchange, they would take some sort of a retainer or a fee. So when you look at businesses like McDonald's, Subway, KFC, some of the American brands like Pizza Hut, or you think of other brands which are in other locations, Costa Cafe, Cafe Nero, Starbucks. These are all businesses which have expanded into other countries by using franchising as a model. That means they are able, because they're established brand, they have the established supply chains. What they've then decided to do is essentially allow other businesses to do partnership with them, and using their brand and their services, they are able to franchise in exchange for a return for a fixed fee, and that allows you to run their business and offer it to their customers. Now, in this case, there are advantages and disadvantages, because franchising would mean that the company does not need to go into the nitty-gritty of doing a market expansion on their own. Similarly, for licensing, there are some advantages and there are some disadvantages or challenges, and those are summarized in the table. But let's look at one of them. Say, for example, joint venture. Now, joint venture is basically forming a partnership with a foreign company to produce and do activities together. So if I look at the example of JCB, or if I look at the example of Caterpillar as a brand, which produces large industrial scale tow trucks and other industrial equipment. You look at an example of Boeing. You look at example of Airbus in the European region. Now, Airbus is formed of is a company, but it has a joint venture for manufacturing aircraft with a lot of its suppliers, partners across the various countries in Europe. So in the UK, Airbus has a subsidiary which only manufactures the wings of the aircraft and the wings related components. And then the second part is engines. Now, some part of the engine is manufactured in the UK, and then some part Rolls-Royce engines, and some part of the wing is manufactured here. Once this is done, then the parts are shipped across to Toulouse, and obviously some part of the integration operational side of things happen there. Tires come from somebody else, and other equipment which is required, for interiors and other things come from somebody else. So here, it's such a big operation and there are so many complex parts which have to be, manufactured. You would generally see, are required to say, let's do a quick Google. So if I look at the number of parts and how many parts are essentially required, for, say, for example, the aerospace industry to work, and for a finished product like an airplane to be produced, you would generally see that it would involve maybe thousands and hundreds of thousands of parts. So in this case, the company would need to have a joint venture, because it won't be able to manufacture everything on its own. So it creates a venture or a joint set of activities with another company by merging their expertise. So I might be looking at producing wings, or let's look at a simpler example like car or automobiles. If you look at BMW, now BMW also has lots of joint ventures with other companies. You look at Volkswagen, you look at Daimler Chrysler. Now, if you look at Audi, if I look at one of the brands or if I look at, say, Volkswagen, one of the engines in one of the cars is actually a BMW engine. Or if I look at some models within the Volkswagen range, some of them have a Fiat engine. Now, the reason why this joint venture is done is because when they introduce models, they want to club and share the expertise which the company has, and in those cases they will form a joint venture. So you will bring something to the table, some other company will bring something to the table in terms of some sort of an expertise, and that would make perfect sense to a business, and then around that will be business activities. So in this case, joint venture allows shared cost and risks to be put into place. It allows access to your knowledge and expertise, which one of the companies might not have. And this allows, the development of business or business activities to happen for the processes of expansion. Now, if I look at certain companies in Europe, automobile companies exporting cars or manufacturing them in India and China, they would want to localize and, look at reducing costs. So what they are going to do is outsource some part of the car in terms of its manufacturing and procurement of raw material for that from local factories or local suppliers. And that would mean they might need a joint venture to be done for example, car tires, because that is something which is required for most cars to be sold in other countries. The conditions, the way the materials and other bits have to be treated in an environment which has 40-degree temperatures or higher temperatures, might be very different from temperatures in Europe, wherein you have winter tires in the winter and you have softer tires, which are winter tires, which have softer rubber, and then you have harder tires or hard rubber tires for summer. But in countries like India or in other places which have tropical or very hot climate, in those cases you would need tires with harder substance, and in those cases a subsidiary or a joint venture with a company would be more useful rather than manufacturing something in Europe and then shipping it there, which is not even conducive or usable in the market. So in those cases, combining expertise and looking at diversifying in terms of risk allows you to do a joint venture. Then companies also look at wholly owned subsidiaries, they look at strategic alliances, they look at e-commerce. If I look at strategic alliances here mean that the company would do an alliance with another company in another country, and that would be offering its products and services. So if you look at Walmart has gone into strategic alliance with a lot of companies where it wants to expand globally. Now, it is not setting up stores, but what Walmart is doing is using its brand and its pull of the brand and the advantages of supply chain and bargaining and negotiation power that it has with suppliers, manufacturers, farmers across the world. It is able to provide cheaper products or have wider access to product chains when it wants to sell and goods in other countries. So in this case, it might get into a strategic alliance with a local subsidiary or a company in a country, and then use their infrastructure to be able to market their products. And that would be a strategic alliance for a certain number of years or months, or for certain product segments, which will allow the company to have an agreement. And in those cases, they would take some stake in the company so that the partner cannot walk away. And in their part, they will provide some stake or reverse, let's say some sort of guarantee, which would allow the partnership to survive for a number of years. And that would be termed as strategic alliance. It could be for technology transfer. For example, when we look at large companies working together and forming alliances, they would do so because they have one company has access to technology or innovative product that they've created. Like if I look at the Pfizer botnet, and AstraZeneca, relationships, what we do see is that Pfizer came up with the formula and spent a lot of money in R&D, but botnet is the one wherein they looked at, essentially trials, tested, and, then producing the vaccine. So when we look at this kind of an alliance between the two companies, this is a strategic alliance. So one of them has the patents, the other has the ability to be able to market it, manufacture it, and then process it. And this is a strategic alliance which allows them to come together as a partner to be able to work and then sell some of the vaccines in different countries, negotiations with governments, and all those things. So this could be an example of strategic alliance. So similarly, when you look at ways through which companies would want to expand into the market, these could be the various ways. And what I've done is I've explained them in a bit of detail, where, with regards to what are the clear avenues through which companies can expand. So exporting, licensing, franchising, joint venture, wholly owned subsidiaries, strategic alliances, and e-commerce. Now, for the part that I want to look at is third, which is the third assessment criteria. I have looked at the IFA, which is YSL as a consumer brand, as a luxury brand, to discuss the third assessment criteria. So here what I've taken is I've taken a luxury brand like YSL. If YSL, IFA Laurent wants to expand into international market. Now it's originally, I think, a French brand. So YSL is a French brand, I think. Italian brand. Is it French or Italian? I think both. Let me just have a quick word. But I think it is a French brand, and it was started by IFA Laurent, in the 1940s or 50s. and it has become an iconic brand in the 1960s. And then, it's a French luxury brand. So when we look at how a business like this would want to expand into, or if I look at a business like Louis Vuitton, if they want to, or Gucci, for example, from Italy, if they want to expand into other countries, what would be the recommended mode of entry into a particular market? So for this, in order for us to discuss, we have to take a particular business, and I've taken this luxury brand, which is YSL. You could take any brand or any company that you feel you have access to, or is of interest, and that could be used to basically cover this assessment criteria, which is making recommendations for a preferred mode of entry of business into a market. So when we talk about IFA Direct, what we are looking at is it's a French luxury, fashion product, which was originally started, in 1961. It is it has got a pedigree in the market that it is recognized as a very iconic brand as far as luxury products are concerned, whether it's ladies' bags, clothes, perfumes, whatever it is. Now, over the years, it has expanded. Now, when we look at the 90s, LPG, as I will use the word, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So some of these brands started to enter into international markets. Now, what were the preferred routes through which it sought expansion into international markets? So if I look at a couple of things just before I go into slides, when do you think a brand like YSL would look at, expanding into other markets? They would look at one, they feel that they have created enough noise and have become such a big brand name that their products and services are required or are in demand in other places, in other locations. Second could be because it's a luxury brand, it's not an ordinary brand that people can buy. It is a luxury brand. They also need to look at the economic status and the affordability of its goods and services in certain countries. So what YSL did was it expanded into markets like America first, because they, sought that markets, the American markets in particular, had the ability, the consumers in that market had the ability in terms of price points, in terms of the ability to buy their products and services. So it started to expand outside France into markets like Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, and the European market. Apart from the European markets, the big splash into the American market and the Japanese market. This was done primarily because they felt that the demand of the product was there, and also the consumer had the ability to be able to buy its products. And the reputation of the product was for one of the most important criteria when consumers were looking at making a purchase on a perfume brand or a clothing brand, or for example, a ladies, footwear or a ladies hand purse brand. And their products, because they are premium, they had to carefully consider what would be the ways in which they would be able to expand into other countries. Now, when we look at recommendations, so obviously we need to be doing a bit of research. So when I went onto the YSL website and I looked at studying about YSL on Britannica Encyclopedia site, Wikipedia, what I have learned is that they, over the years, have looked at a process through which they expand into a particular country for selling their goods and services. They go by opening their own brand outlets. They look at the strategy of wholly owning subsidiaries. That means the entire subsidiary or the operation is started from scratch, and YSL as a brand owns the operation. They don't do any partnerships or any sort of franchises or strategic alliances. They basically go into the market by going into a particular market like New York, which they entered, or Washington, they've gone, or Los Angeles and San Francisco, some of the bigger cities, Las Vegas, they've gone and opened their own brand outlets and their own operations from scratch. And that approach basically is the wholly owned subsidiary approach. That means they've created YSL America, YSL France, YSL Spain, YSL UK, and they all are in 100% control of the YSL group. So this particular route through which they look at expansion to an international market is a route which is by opening their own subsidiary, that means own operations or company, and that is under their own brand by applying, to open operations as the company itself in a new location. And that has obviously given it lots of advantages and in terms of advantages, but also, kind of thrown up a lot of challenges for them. So the advantages are that it allows it to be in complete control of how its brand is represented, how the communication around the brand is done, and what it states and what it stands for is totally delivered and in control of the company itself. So when they open their own brand stores, they hire their own employees, they train them. Some of the employees get training in France in their headquarters. They then are put through rigorous tests, and then these employees sometimes are expats, are posted to their subsidiaries for a number of for a fixed period of time on deputation, and they then train the local staff to be able to offer the same level of service as you would get in the YSL store in France or in Paris. And this also allows them to get direct control over how they would market. It is all designed out of their head office. They control the distribution channel, they control sales, everything, which preserves the exclusivity of the brand. So it is not something that is easily available. It is not something that is easily replicable, and it is not available. It is not easy for it to be duplicated, and they are in control of all the brand elements or all the products side of things that they are able to market in a new operation. And they take this approach of wholly owned subsidiary. The advantage there is all the profits that the company makes also are profits of the company owned and alone only. There's no alliance, there is no joint venture, there is no franchise. So everything in terms of revenue which is generated, profit is generated, loss is generated, is owned by the subsidiary. Now, if we look at in certain places, in order to make its product available, in order to ensure that the product is visible and also available to consumers, now obviously it cannot open brand stores in all locations. So in Paris, for example, it might have 2-3 stores. In UK, in certain cities, it might have certain stores. In certain other cities, it might have certain stores. But if I look at their availability of products, in certain places, what they've done is what is called joint ventures, wherein if there's a luxury retailer or a luxury brand already in the market, they have done some sort of a JV or a joint venture to be able to make their products available from their stores. So if I go to a luxury brand store in Manchester, normally they would have brands like Gucci, Dior, YSL, or other brands, for example, Chanel, and some of the other brands, British brands like Mulberry, and they have opened up a store which is like Selfridges in the UK, and they represent a lot of luxury brands which you can buy from their stores. Now, Selfridges is an exclusive chain of stores in the UK. It's present in lots of different cities, but this store is a very upmarket store, and it only deals or retails luxury brands. Now, in order to get reach and distribution in the market, Louis Vuitton or YSL, in this case, we are discussing YSL as a brand, they cannot open stores in all locations. Now, YSL stores and products you find in duty-free shops when you travel to airports, you have them in larger and bigger cities, in the plush possible, high streets. But would the company look at opening 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 stores in the UK? No, because they know the demand for their products is in certain locations, certain stratas of the society which can afford economically these products, which is a lady's handbag, let's face it, starts at about, average of £1,000. Now, what would that mean? They would need to make their products also available to customers who can buy in different locations, but they do not have the advantage of opening stores in that location because it's too expensive to run and maintain. So in those cases, they do what is called joint ventures with other luxury brand stores which sell similar products or similar premium brands. And there they would make their products available. And this would be done through the process of what is called a joint venture. So in some cases, YSL, I don't know whether they have a joint venture with Selfridges, but I know that their products can be bought from Selfridges and they are sold amongst some of the other luxury brands like Gucci, Dior, Chanel, and they allow these products to be sold from these locations. And that is why you would see that sometimes in order to go all out and make sure that distribution of products is available or product is available through distribution, they would look at maybe a joint venture. Now, one of the things which I would suggest that why YSL is also now focused on e-commerce, is because if you look at the proliferation of internet, that means the Internet of Things, accessibility of products that you can buy through the web, because of the good availability of internet and faster speed internet available in lots of locations, most companies which are global brands have started to focus on what is called an e-commerce strategy. And when we look at an e-commerce strategy, what they are looking at is basically a strategy wherein they're able to go direct to consumer, D2C as a model, and they can list their products on their own corporate website. And then this website has the ability wherein they can, consumers can come in, transact business. That means they can buy the products, and these products then can be shipped across to any place in the world globally from any location. And this side of the business is making sense for YSL and some of the luxury brands, is because they want to keep their costs low in terms of infrastructure, because these products people don't buy quite often. So these are premium products people buy, once in maybe 3 years, 5 years, once in a lifetime, and the products are bought, and they have a long shelf life. They have longevity in the terms because the products are quality products. So in those cases, in order to attract more customers and gain more revenue and profits, or make more profits, the companies are looking at now expanding through e-commerce as an option, which means that they can list their products on their company website or on different portals, and that allows customers to buy these products. The prices can be controlled, or how many are sold, from where they are sold, where they are shipped. All that can be controlled by the company, and this allows them to access a very broad, customer base across different countries and geographies. Plus, on the flip side, it helps them reduce physical infrastructure costs, which are basically done away with, because when you're selling goods online, you're listing the products. You might not even have them in inventory, but you might publish a lead time that, okay, when you order this product, it'll take 2 or 3 weeks for it to ship. And then once you get the order, you can manufacture the product to customer specification, and it can then be shipped. So it provides a lot of advantages to some of the luxury brands like YSL, and that is why e-commerce route is making perfect sense for them, and that is one of the recommended routes for the company to look at selling its products globally. Is that okay?
Okay.
Out of the 7 different strategies that we look at, YSL probably would look at 2 or 3 of them. One is wholly owned subsidiaries, second would be joint ventures, and the third is e-commerce. So from my research that I've done, basis the UK market, I think that these are the 3 best options that I would recommend if YSL would look at expanding its business and its products to people and consumers globally. So it could look at wholly owned stores. It could look at forming a joint venture with some of the other luxury brands from which they can sell and retail their products, because they would have the advantage of understanding how a premium products need to be positioned, how the customers need to be served, and obviously they would preserve the integrity of the premium products from a point of view of ensuring their image and reputation is also kept in line with, because some of the other brands are as reputable from where they are being sold or customers have access to it. And the last but not the least, e-commerce, which basically allows them to transform and not use any physical retail infrastructure, but sell it from their website, sell it from their corporate website, and sell directly to consumers, which means they can make more profit, or they can reduce costs, because there is the traditional brick and mortar model is not involved in selling some of these products. So customer service, for example, might be a bigger challenge for them, because at some stage when somebody places an order, calling them up, giving them a bit of a background, how it will be shipped, when it will be shipped, would be more important than probably having somebody at the retail counter, because all it's being done through is by various pictures, photographs, and designs being advertised, and customers being able to browse on the website and then choose what to buy. And they would be the advantageous routes for, YSL as a brand if they are looking at expanding business into other geographies. Is that okay?
Okay.
And then I put 1 or 2 slides. If you have to think of another business apart from YSL, what are the things generically you would be thinking, to come up with this recommendation? So you'll have to look at the nature of business, the size of the business, what markets they want to look at, how much of research data they have, what is the risk tolerance the product could have, how much of control they want on the selling of their products to customers, and then what could be the product itself. Is it a complex product? Is it a product or a service which requires specialist manpower and equipment to be able to be sold, or collateral to be produced? Or in some cases, what are the long-term objectives of the company? So if you answer these questions, that will help you pick up a brand that you can justify and make recommendations for that business or that brand to make an entry into or expand globally or make an entry into a particular market.
Okay. I see.
If I look at French military, company, or if I look at the company in the UK, which is arms manufacturer, so you would probably look at, they would not be, essentially companies which will be looking at joint ventures or subsidiaries. So when we look at big companies, which BAE Systems, for example, in the UK, they are a specialist company which basically manufactures, ammunition, tanks, lots of different types of products. And they would not want to expand into other markets by opening up subsidiaries or doing joint ventures. They would be keeping the IP to themselves, the technology to themselves, but they will be looking at marketing and, participation in exhibitions and fairs and, doing alliances with the government for long-term contracts, which could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, to be able to supply equipment. So if you answer these questions, you would be looking at picking up a business which you can justify and make recommendations for, and might not need to do a lot of research in. But if I pick up BAE Systems, it might be something too big or something too drastic, which I need to research quite a lot to come up with options or recommendations of why and how they would expand into another market. Is that okay?
Okay, I see.
Stuff. Now, on Moodle, I've uploaded both the Learning Outcome 3 and 4 presentations. What you would need to be able to do at some stage would be, when you log into Moodle, go through some of the additional handouts that I've put in here to understand, or links to the articles on websites. One of them is Global Markets and Business Opportunity. The other is Expanding Your Business Internationally and What are the 15 Essential Things. So these are two good articles that you could look at reading. But apart from that, in general, if I just briefly switch you over, to the unit, what you'll see is that I've uploaded 1 or 2 research articles, which will give you an idea in terms of how you would generally see covering Learning Outcome 3. So one is the impact of globalization, market entry routes for international business. These 2 particular articles, are a good read to come up with good knowledge on what we've discussed today and yesterday with regards to the economic systems and things which essentially help drive globalization. And this is a good read of about 15 minutes. And the second is this particular research article, which is market entry modes for international business. So when we talk about diversification, talk about joint ventures, franchises, this would cover and give you details of how businesses are expanding today and why maybe e-commerce is a favored strategy for a lot of businesses to look at expansion, specifically if they are selling products directly to consumer. So these 2 would give you more detailing and knowledge and information about the routes which the companies can take when they look at expanding internationally.
I see. Okay.
Good stuff. So we will meet up on Monday. I've sent the invites already on to you with regards to, the Learning Outcome 4 for Monday, and then the assignment discussion, which is on the 31st. So these invites, I will text you on the WhatsApp group as well, so that you are, and then we'll be meeting up on the 28th at 11, and then 31st at 11 to cover and complete this unit.
Yes, exactly, on Monday. Yes. Okay.
If you think of any questions or if you have any queries, if you need any help, do let me know through the email, and I will send or maybe provide answers or additional documents that you'll be able to read with regards to this unit. There are 2 books also which have been uploaded, which are the recommended books on Moodle. Just to quickly share with you, these are the 2 books which are recommended for study. So they have been uploaded here. One of them is the International Business edition, or International Business. That's one of this book that has been uploaded. And the second book is basically the one which is Globalization Essentials, and that has also been uploaded. So if you need to read some bits related to this, you'll have to go through 1 or 2 chapters in particular And they would be, giving you more information in terms of what we've covered through some of the sessions. And I've used some of these to, obviously make presentations for what we are going through now.
Okay.
Good stuff. So I'll catch up with you, on Monday. Have a good weekend in the meanwhile.